Been kind of a sad day. I've just been sad about the passing of Dolly Parton. She was one of the good people. I mean, she was truly a good person, and I'm pretty sad about the whole thing. And so, it was kind of a sad day, and seeing everybody give their remembrances of her. She was just a good person. Never had any interactions with her ever. But reading the people who she did interact with, Eminem just broke me because she sent him a congratulations letter when he was elected to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And, in the letter, she said, a lot of people think you're weird, but I think you're great at what you do. Maybe we'll meet sometime. I wasn't there this year, but maybe we'll meet sometime. I just thought, she was just a good person. She really was. And as people pointed out, she could have been a billionaire, but she decided not to be. She used her money for good, and we just don't see that very often in this world. So kind of sad about the passing of Dolly Parton today. But that's enough of that. Enough of being sad, but we are going to miss her. We are going to miss her. I'm tired of losing good people. I'm really tired of losing good people. There's a lot going on here in Utah. I want to talk about this absolutely bonkers meeting I went to of the Salt Lake County Republican Party on Saturday. It was 7 hours long. I sat through the whole thing, and they really didn't do anything. It was just basically an airing of the grievances. So I want to talk about that meeting of the Salt Lake County GOP. The meeting was supposed to be to go over their plans for the 2026 midterms, which are, as we sit, I think less than 70 days away now. Ballots will be going out to voters in less than 50 days. And so they were supposed to have a meeting of the Salt Lake County GOP's Central Committee. That's the governing body of the Republican Party in Salt Lake County. And on the agenda was supposed to be their presenting of the plans. The chair, Mike Carey, was going to present the plans for the 2026 election. They didn't get to that at all because they spent 7 hours trying to kick him out of office, trying to reinstate the vice chair who got removed from her position back in June. And they did vote to do that, even though the rules probably don't allow for it. Anyway, we'll go over that meeting. It was nuts. And as I was walking out of that meeting, the one thing I kept saying was, if you wonder why people don't engage with politics today, why normal people don't get involved with politics, it's meetings like that one. There were almost 400 people in attendance, and they fought for hours over that. We're going to talk about Stuart Adams sending cease and desist letters to 4 of his critics and the fiery response from State Auditor Tina Cannon. She basically said, "See you in court." We'll talk about the decision by the Supreme Court yesterday, the U.S. Supreme Court, allowing parts of Donald Trump's plans to restrict mail-in voting to go into effect, and what it means for Utah. That will be on the agenda tonight. Enes Freedom Kanter, washed up NBA player, total stunt about transgender athletes in the WNBA, making it all about him. And of course, Senator Mike Lee comes to his defense. Enes Kanter is a loser, absolute loser. Governor Cox said that the data center process was not good. And then when he was asked during his press conference about the reduction of Bears Ears and the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, polling shows that Utahns don't like it. But then he said, well, actually, most Utahns do like it. Nope. No. You've got nothing to back that up, sir. So that's all on my list. As we are literally sitting here, less than 3 months from the election, ballots start hitting the mailboxes in less than 50 days. So we are getting down into it. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Brian Schott. I am the I am the publisher and managing editor of Utah Political Watch. You'll find us online at utahpolitics.news. We are celebrating our second birthday. I started this website, I started this platform 2 years ago in August, and it has grown. My wife is not surprised it has grown. I'm surprised that it has grown. I'm thankful that it's growing, but we are celebrating our second birthday. And what it is it is independent political journalism. We cover politics here in Utah. No corporate sponsors, no billionaires writing me checks. We are relying 100% on we're relying 100% on support of our readers, our listeners, our viewers, and it has been even more successful than I thought it would be. And that's all because of you. And I am so thankful for all of it. And just as a little pitch, if you want to support what I do, we're having a little sale through the end of August. You can go to my website, utahpolitics.news, and we're offering you 20% off a year's subscription through the end of August, so through the 31st. So your subscription usually costs $55. Now it costs $44. And I'm starting to move more articles. Now that my reader base is large enough, I'm starting to move more of my articles behind the paywall. I wrote an article today about that insane GOP meeting. And the first part was for everyone to read, but the good stuff was behind the paywall. And that's because my reader base is large enough, and I rely on the support of readers. A lot of my stuff is free, but not everything is free, and more and more stuff will be for subscribers only. So it's a great time for you to take advantage of that. You can go to the website, utahpolitics.news, and get 20% off a year's subscription. It's only $44. I did have one person involved in Utah politics with that story about the Republican Party meeting. They texted me and said, "Fine, I'll finally subscribe so I can read the article." And I said, "Thank you." I was very thankful. But you can go to the website, utahpolitics.news, and get a 20% off a year's subscription to the platform. So with that out of the way, let's talk about what's happening in the news. And let me see where we're going to go first. Let me look at my really, I think the first place we should start is with outgoing Senate President Stuart Adams, lame duck Senate President Stuart Adams, who lost his reelection bid to Stephanie Hollis back in June. And last week, he sent cease and desist letters to 4 of his critics who basically they were legal threats to take them to court for defamation over statements that they had made leading up to the election. The 4 who got the letters, one was State Auditor Tina Cannon. Another one was a political consultant, Gabby Finlayson. She's part of the Elevate Utah team. And then 2 hosts of a far-right podcast called the God and Country podcast. And they that is where Tina Cannon made her comments. She was interviewed on that podcast. And so they got these letters, and it was Adams demanding retractions from them for things that they said. And if they did not retract them, then he threatened. The insinuation was he was getting ready to go to court for defamation. And that caused a huge buzz when those letters came out, reported in the news. And then people started to look into it. And it's not easy for a public figure, especially one as prominent as Stuart Adams, the most powerful politician in the state, especially one as prominent as that, to prove defamation. Because you have to, under New York Times v. Sullivan, the Supreme Court decision that pretty much allows media to operate the way it does, without getting sued for every little thing, you have to prove actual malice. You have to prove that what these people said was wrong. They knew it was, not only what they said was wrong, but that they knew it was wrong, and that they said it in order to cause damage to your reputation or damage to you, actual malice behind that. And that's going to be really hard for it's really hard for a politician to win a defamation case in the first place. Didn't Sarah Palin sue the New York Times a bunch of times, and she kept getting it thrown out of court? Now Trump is suing the Wall Street Journal, and he's suing the BBC. But it's really hard in the United States for a politician, a public figure, to win a defamation case. And complicating matters more for Adams is that Utah expanded its SLAPP law. It's anti-SLAPP law, and that's a law that prevents against nuisance lawsuits, retaliatory lawsuits that are designed just to cause people a bunch of money, to cost them a bunch of time and effort. And in 2023, they expanded their anti-SLAPP law to make it so that it included, things commenting on issues of public importance or things that are up in the legislature. It was all part of that war on woke. It was all part of, people are getting canceled for the things they said, and so we want to take that away. And so they expanded the law in 2023 to make it even harder to sue someone over things that they said if it involves issues of public importance or issues of policy. And Adams voted for that law. And so that complicates this whole thing as well. These letters all went out from Adams' lawyer, and some of the things he was upset about. He was upset about things that were said about the issue surrounding his step-granddaughter, who was charged with 4 felony counts of rape when she was 18 years old. And then after that happened, he helped draft a law change in Utah that changed the circumstances of when prosecutors could treat some 18-year-olds who were charged with rape of a child because she had sex with a 13-year-old boy. And in Utah, if you're under the age of 14, you cannot consent to sex. So it is literally child rape. And he changed the law so that some prosecutors can treat 18-year-olds who are charged with that with a lesser charge, so long as they're still in high school. And Adam's step-granddaughter was still in high school at the time. Now, the law was not retroactive, and it would not have impacted this case at all. But the prosecutor, the judge, and the defense in the case all said that this law change was one of the reasons why she was offered a plea deal. So instead of pleading guilty, or instead of being charged with 4 first-degree felonies, she pled guilty to 1 second-degree felony and 3 misdemeanors. And she didn't have to register as a sex offender. And so people said some things about that, and Adams was demanding a retraction. He was mad. He was upset about Tina Cannon. They have a feud about her office space in the state capitol. If you'll remember, before she was elected, the legislature passed a bill that was moving the auditor out of their space on the main floor of the Capitol at the rotunda. This was before Tina Cannon was elected. But that legislation said the auditor had to be given, quote, substantially similar space in the Capitol. Well, at the very end of the 2025 session, like in the final days of the 2025 session, they dropped this bill that took that protection away. And what they were going to do is they were going to move her out of her office on the first floor of the Capitol and move her into another building in the Capitol complex, move her out of the Capitol completely. And there was a lot of pushback. And the reason why they're moving her is to make more space for the Republican caucus in the Senate and in the House. And so they're moving the auditor. They also they also are going to be moving the Utah Elections Office out of their space. And so the House and the Senate are going to get more office space for their caucus members in the Capitol. they literally have buildings on the complex. There's the Senate building and then the House building, where a lot of them have their offices, but they want to move more of the Republican caucus into the Capitol. And the people that they're going to be moving are the state auditor, who happens to be the first woman to win a statewide election in Utah, Tina Cannon, and they're moving the lieutenant governor's staff, and lieutenant governor also happens to be a woman. So it's not a good look there. But that's what they're doing. They're moving these full-time employees, full-time state employees out of there so they can make more space for part-time employees. Take that as you will. But some of the things that Cannon said is she said that Adams controls the Capitol Preservation Board. Now, the Capitol Preservation Board is the group that decides on space in the Capitol. They're the ones who oversee everything in the Capitol except for the House and the Senate spaces, because the House and the Senate control their own spaces. But the Capitol Preservation Board controls everything else. And she said that he controls it, even though the statute says the chair is actually the governor or the lieutenant governor, and then the Speaker of the House or their designee and the Senate President or their designee are the co-chairs. Now, Stuart Adams, the President of the Senate, and Mike Schultz, Speaker of the House, are part of the Capitol Preservation Board. So they pointed out that that was untrue. Some of the other things that were said, I think Gabby Finlinson was attacking Adams over the whole data center thing up in Box Elder County. I don't have the letters in front of me, but she said some things that he was demanding retraction for. So anyway, that sets the scene. Stuart Adams is demanding a retraction from these people, even though it's really hard to sue someone for defamation, especially if you are a politician. So that's where things sit right now. But yesterday, I was shared the letter from Tina Cannon back to her, or the letter her lawyer sent back to Adams. And essentially, what this letter said was, bring it on. She is not backing down. She said, I'll see you in court. That's what this letter said. And as I pull it up here, it's worth it to quote some of the things that she said in this letter. Response from her lawyer. It says, your letter seems to have the press as an audience, as it takes the form of an attempted set the record straight opinion piece. In fact, it appears your client was more interested in using the letter as a press release than as an attempt to resolve a dispute. We have become aware that your client or one of his representatives appear to have released the demand letter to the press before it was served on my client, as it became the subject of a Salt Lake Tribune article yesterday morning, meaning it was that story was broken by the Salt Lake Tribune. And what Tina Cannon's lawyer is saying, it certainly looks like you sent that letter to the press before you gave it to us. So what you were trying to do is you're trying to set a narrative in the media. So that's the first part of the response. Letter goes on. If your client wants his opinion heard, he could have simply put that on the record in the Senate or taken his case directly to the press instead of using proper political means at his disposal or even asking for a one-on-one meeting with Auditor Cannon. Your client chose the bully's route, using an unrelated dispute with Auditor Cannon in an improper attempt to distract from Senator Adams' political failings that resulted in his recent primary loss, is improper. That is a pretty sick legal burn. Essentially, what this letter is saying is you are sending these letters out to try and distract from the fact that you lost your reelection bid. And I'm sure Adams is still smarting about that. And when I first saw the story about these letters being sent by Adams to people demanding retractions, I think I called it a temper tantrum, because that's what it seems like. It seems like this is just a temper tantrum from someone who lost their election. They're lashing out and they're trying to find some way to make themselves feel better, some way to blame someone else. And he's clearly blaming these statements that were made about him as part of the reasons why he lost the election. And he issued a statement when the media asked him about it. He said, I want the lies to stop. I want these things to stop. So then the letter goes on to talk about how all of the claims in his letter, he makes 5 claims against Cannon, and they say, importantly, your letter purports to show 5 statements that are allegedly false. They are not. You also failed to describe how such statements are legally defamatory. Again, they are not. You failed to address the fact that your client is a quintessential public figure, and as such, to have a viable claim, he would have to prove actual malice. So they're just laying it all out. They're saying your claims have no merit. We are not taking this. We are not going to respond. We're not going to do what you ask. It goes on to say, any statements and opinions of Auditor Cannon involve public policy, were related to her official duties, and were otherwise protected by well-established law. In short, your protestations are hollow and without merit, and it appears to have failed to garner any sympathy in the press. Yikes. Ay, ouch. That is just brutal and cutting. Of course, if you proceed, we look forward to putting your client under oath for a thorough questioning of his claims and the role his own actions over the last several years played in his purported damages. It is clear that any damages he has suffered, and there were likely none, are solely the result of his own actions, including those taken behind the scenes, wielding influence as Senate President, as reported in the press. Recent examples include his involvement with MIDA and the Box Elder County data center that has angered many voters. And then they say if he moves forward with a lawsuit, they are going to use this expansion of the Utah SLAPP law, as I explained earlier, the Utah Anti-SLAPP law, which is now called the Uniform Public Expression Protection Act. And under that act, you can expedite things to say, you got to prove it. Do you have any proof to back up your claims? And if they don't, then the person who's getting sued can move to have it dismissed, and you can get, and that person can recoup their attorney's fees. And they're saying, we are going to do just that. They said, I assume you are aware, or will become so, that your client is exposing himself to an award of attorney's fees and costs under Section 110 of the Act if you file an action without basis threatening to stifle free speech. So essentially, Auditor Cannon is saying, we are not going to comply. You're threatening us. We believe that your claims are bogus. You have not suffered any damage, and anything that Auditor Cannon said is protected under this Utah Public Expression Act, Public Expression Protection Act. So they're saying, if you want to move forward on this, fine, but we're going to put you under oath. And I think the last thing that Stuart Adams wants is to have discovery in this case. I mean, I was talking to someone about this, and that's exactly the conclusion they came to as well. They said that's the last thing his attorneys want, is that he's going to be put under oath and have to be deposed in this case. I don't think he wants that. So this is just a threat, and the problem is nobody seems to really be scared of him anymore. He was one of the most feared people in Utah state government. He was one of the most powerful politicians in Utah, but then he lost. And it doesn't seem like a lot of people are scared of him anymore. And that's kind of what happens when you lose. So Auditor Cannon is not backing down. She said that she's not going to comply. The podcast hosts have said similarly the same thing. I haven't seen anything publicly from Gabrielle Finlinson of Elevate Utah, how she's going to go forward. But I expect that what they said is going to that they're going to be saying something similar to what Auditor Cannon. And so, that's where we are with this. Now, there is an interesting part of the whole thing, the whole pushback between Adams and Cannon about the Capitol Preservation Board. Now, Cannon said that Adams controls the Capitol Preservation Board. And Adams' attorney in his letter was like, no, that's not how it is under statute. Under statute, the governor or the lieutenant governor runs the Capitol Preservation Board, and he's not the chair. Well, I went back and looked at all of the Capitol Preservation Board meetings back to the year 2021, and there have been about 21 of those, and Adams was the chair of those meetings 57% of the time. 57% of those meetings, Stuart Adams was the chair. And there were at least 3 meetings, maybe 4. I think there were actually 4 meetings, 3 with Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson and 1 with Spencer Cox when he was lieutenant governor, where they were in the room and they were supposed to be running the meeting, but Stuart Adams was the chair. So this is kind of a weird claim to make, a weird objection to have, that Stuart Adams controls the Capitol Preservation Board. Not under statute, but if you look at the reality of things, he was chairing it most of the time. He chaired most of the meetings and chaired meetings even when the lieutenant governor, who was supposed to be in charge of the meeting, was in the room. There are at least 4 examples of that happening, which is not how the statute is supposed to go. Also, let's rewind a little bit, this whole fight over office space. Last year, during the meeting in May, I believe, the Capitol Preservation Board voted to evict the auditor from her office and move her down 1 floor to where the visitor center is now. And they voted to do that. Well, Tina Cannon filed a lawsuit and said, you broke the state's open meetings law, because that was not really on the agenda. On the agenda, the only thing it said was visitor center, and it didn't really have, and no one really knew that this issue was going to come up, that there was going to be a vote on this. So she filed a lawsuit, and in their, I believe the September meeting is when it came back, the next meeting, they voted again. The lawyer said, you probably should hold a revote on this just so you're not breaking open meetings laws. And so they did, and then she dropped her lawsuit. But one of the complaints that she was making is that even when Stuart Adams was chairing the meetings, they didn't vote to make him the chair, because usually when the chair is not there, then someone has to have a motion from the floor to have this person chair it. Because technically, Stuart Adams and Speaker Schultz are co-chairs. So either of them. But even when Schultz was in the room, Adams was the chair, except for one time that Schultz chaired it because Adams was running late and asked Schultz to take over. And they never had a vote or, who should be over the meeting. So they didn't follow that part of the meeting rules. But in this meeting where they held the revote to redo their vote and move the auditor's office, they did at the beginning of the meeting have a motion to make Stuart Adams the chair of the meeting because the regular chair wasn't there. That's the only time that they did that, going all the way back to the year 2021. And so it was all, very loosey-goosey the way that they were handling these meetings. But Stuart Adams was in charge of the meetings. He was leading the meetings more than half of the time, even when his co-chair was there and they never voted to make him the chair. And even in some instances where the lieutenant governor was in the room, was there, but Stuart Adams was in charge. So things can be essentially, it's all very technical, but I think it adds some context to this that, Stuart Adams' complaints are a little bit hollow. Okay, let me go through some of the comments before we move on to another topic. Let's see. A lot of stuff going on over here in TikTok. Mida19 says every Democrat should vote Tina Cannon. She's about honesty and went after Adams. She's brave. she's not up until 2028. So she won't be up for election then. But, she has really decided that her brand is going to be rooting out corruption. And I'm not saying that, I'm taking no position on Tina Cannon, but I do know that she's really pushing forward with audits of state government and spending, and is really trying to root out corruption. So, as someone who agrees with that, I say more power to her, and I hope that she is successful in that. Let's see. Looking here, Daniel says, do you think Kevin O'Leary will get the data center even half? As you know, Adams, and I really think that the whole data center issue up in Box Elder County is the reason why he lost his reelection bid. The process behind it, people were upset that MIDA pushed through this whole data center. And the process was, there was public input, but it was essentially railroaded. They knew what they were going to do, and they went ahead and did it. And then they twisted the arms of the Box Elder County commissioners and forced them to vote for it and approve it. And then there was a huge backlash, and that backlash led to 3 people losing their jobs. And now you're seeing this huge backlash to data centers across the country. Even Governor Cox, in his press conference last week, said that the whole process around the data center was not handled well, which is really weird, because when he was asked about it earlier, he just basically stamped his feet and said that people were wrong, and they need to accept these things, because that's progress. People don't want data centers. They don't want them in their backyards. And this is a rare issue that is uniting people both on the left and the right. This is one of these rare political issues that, unites everybody. And it has turned out to be an extremely potent political issue. Stuart Adams lost his job because of it. And I don't think he's going to be the only person in Utah who loses their job come November. I think that there are some members of the legislature who are whistling past the graveyard right now. They are hoping that they can somehow put this in the rearview mirror, because the whole MIDA issue, the data center issue, these things, voters don't like them, and voters were paying attention. And when they found out what was going on, they were like, no, thank you. Let's see. Gabriel on YouTube says, has this TIF revealed anything new with regard to the race to replace Adams as a Senate president? From what I'm hearing, not really. There's two main candidates. You've got Senator Kirk Cullimore, who is currently the majority leader, and then you've got Senator Evan Vickers, who is the past majority leader. And they're the main candidates to become the next Senate president. What I am hearing is that there might be a little bit of a rural-urban divide. Republicans only have 22 seats right now in the Senate, and vote counters, people who are watching this, they think it might be very close vote right now. And maybe some people are still sitting on the fence, but they don't think either of them has an advantage. And they don't think that the rural senators are going to vote for Cullimore. Davis County has been in charge of the legislature for so long, and now they've got a rural candidate wanting to become the Senate president in Vickers, and the rural senators they like that idea, and from what I understand, they're not supporting Cullimore right now. And this could get really, really interesting, because if Emily Buss in Senate District 11, the Forward Party candidate, if she somehow hangs on to her seat, or if any of the sitting Republican senators lose, that's going to drop their numbers. Right now they're at 22, and if Buss somehow holds on to her seat, that will keep the Republicans at 22, even though her opponent is from the Tooele area, and a lot of the delegates in Tooele, that's why he won the nomination there, because they want that Senate seat. They want someone from Tooele representing them in that Senate seat. But right now it's 22 Republican senators. From what I'm hearing is that vote is really close, or the support is really close. It's not tipping really decisively one way or the other. And the senators will meet right after the election, and they will have a vote, and they're going to go into their caucus room, and they won't come out until they have someone who has won a majority of the vote to become the Senate president. But this is not going to be like in the past where they just went in and it was basically a formality. This is up in the air. This is a true contest, and I'm going to be watching this one really closely because Cullimore, I mean, everything. If you look at my Senate ratings on the website, he is potentially vulnerable. His opponent in that race, name is escaping me right now, but his opponent in the race hasn't really raised a lot of money. And Cullimore has a ton of money because he's the majority leader in the Senate. So he's got a lot of financial backing. And the difference between having money and not having money, it doesn't mean the difference between winning and losing, but it means the difference between running the kind of campaign you want to run versus the kind of campaign that you are forced to run. And when you don't have a lot of money, you are forced to run your campaign a certain way. And so that's an advantage that he will have in that race. But technically, it's not a rock solid red area. It is potentially flippable. I don't know if the Democrats will have someone who could flip that, but it is potentially flippable. And I know that Cullimore, he's got to be at least a little worried about November after everything we've seen, the people pushing back against the anti-union bill and the data centers. So all of this is to say, I don't know which way that race is going to go, but it is, from everything I understand, it is extremely close right now. So let's see what's happening over here on Instagram, if anyone has any comments. Elisa McKnighton on Instagram says, Gabby says she's hired lawyers for the situation, but didn't go into much detail other than that. And that is smart. Absolutely smart. Get yourself a lawyer. If you're going to let her like that, get yourself a lawyer. I'm a member of the media. I'm a solo operation, but I have insurance just in case somebody tries to bring a defamation suit or a slander suit or a misattribution suit against me. I've got $2 million worth of insurance, and it's something I have to protect myself. So I think that is an incredibly smart move to get a lawyer, and I think her mom's a lawyer, so it's not surprising, but I think that's absolutely the right move. Tina Cannon wanted this letter out there. She wanted people to see her response to Stuart Adams because, as she said in her letter, it looks like your letter was a media stunt because they're alleging that these letters were given to the media before they were given to some of the people who were supposed to receive them. She said, at least in her case, the story showed up in the Salt Lake Tribune before she ever got the letter. So they're like, this looks like a media stunt. It looks like you're trying to garner sympathy in the media. I don't know if it worked. I don't know if anybody really feels sorry for Stuart Adams for these things that were said about him. And again, as I said earlier, it's really hard for a person especially a politician, to prove defamation. And the standard is New York Times v. Sullivan. You have to prove actual malice, meaning they knew what they were saying was wrong. They didn't care and they meant to do you harm. And that's a really high bar to clear. I do want to talk about, I wrote this story today. And it was on Saturday, but it took me a while to sort of process it. And we had the Supreme Court mail-in voting thing happen, and we'll get to that tonight as well. But a lot of stuff happened as I was writing on Monday. But so I published a story this morning about the Salt Lake County GOP's Central Committee meeting on Saturday. And this was supposed to be an extremely important meeting. As I've said, we are less than 70 days away from the midterm elections. We are less than 50 days away now from ballots being mailed out to voters. So voting is going to start in approximately 50 days. That's when people are going to get their ballots and start to send them back in. So it is crunch time for all of these campaigns. And on the agenda at this meeting, Party Chair Mike Carey was supposed to present his plan for winning the 2026 midterms. This is his plan, and he was going to share it with members of the Central Committee. There's like 600 and some members of the Central Committee. That is the governing body of the Salt Lake County GOP, and he was going to show them their plan for winning the midterms. And he said in the meeting that he thinks that these elections in Salt Lake County are the most important in the state because Salt Lake County has 34% of the state's population. And his quote was, whichever way Salt Lake County goes in these elections, the rest of the state is going to follow. And that makes a lot of sense because that's where the most people are. And so whichever way Salt Lake County goes, and so Republicans, they're trying to keep their majority on the Salt Lake County Council. They really want to knock off Sim Gill as district attorney. I don't know how many Republicans I've talked to in Salt Lake County, and they have said that their number one goal is ousting Sim Gill as the district attorney in Salt Lake County. They really want that bad. And so this was going to be their playbook. Plus, they have legislative seats that they're going to try to hang on to. They've got a Republican nominee in the 1st Congressional District, Riley Owen, that covers most of Salt Lake County. He's taking on Ben McAdams in that race. So this was going to be his chance to say, this is our game plan, and get them on board and answer questions for that. They never got around to it. They never got to that at all. Why? Because they spent the entire day litigating, relitigating, revisiting this internal feud that has consumed the party for months. They took forever. The meeting started at 9 a.m. and it took them over 2 hours to just approve the agenda for the meeting. That's not atypical for Republican meetings here in Utah. I remember the state convention in 2018 where they nominated Mike Kennedy for U.S. Senate against Mitt Romney. It took them 4 or 5 hours to approve the agenda. So that's not typical, but that's 2 hours that they couldn't spend doing other things. So they argued about the agenda for 2 hours. People were trying to add things to the agenda, remove things from the agenda, change the order, change how long they were going to debate items. It took them 2 hours. They finally got through that. And then what happened was they were looking at these resolutions. The first resolution was to reinstate Sarah Montez as vice chair of the party. She was ousted in June, and I'll explain why. And the second resolution was to kick out the party chair, Mike Carey, for abuse of power. And so that's what they spent their whole day on. With less than 3 months to go until the election, that's what they spent their entire Saturday doing. The governing body of the Salt Lake County Republican Party spent Saturday fighting each other for 7 hours. They finally ended the meeting at 4 p.m. because everybody was exhausted. And it was crazy. I'm going to give you an example. I've caught some video here of just how ridiculous this whole meeting was. At one point, and to understand what I'm going to be telling you here, you have to understand that there is a very deep strain of paranoia that goes through some parts of the some parts of the Central Committee. There are people who are very paranoid about things. And so when they were voting on issues, like if they were voting on how long to debate an issue, somebody wanted to limit debate to 10 minutes, and then somebody wanted to limit it to 45 minutes. Well, the delegates have to vote on that in order to change the agenda. And if the vote is too close to call, because what they do is, in order to vote, you have to hold your credential in the air, and there's just a visual look to see which one is more. And if it's too close to call, then they have to do an actual count. People have to stand up, and they assign people to go around and count who's standing. Well, some members of the committee did not trust the people who were counting votes to deliver accurate numbers. This vote was happening in public. It was right in front of everybody's face. But there were people who did not trust the people who were counting. So what they did was they decided to assign observers, election observers, who walked around right next to the people who were counting votes and watched them like a hawk. Watch them count the votes. that were happening right in front. It's happening right in front of my face, but nobody trusted that. So they had to get election observers, the kind of thing that happens in banana republics in third world countries when you don't trust the results of an election. That's how ridiculous this was. So I'm going to show you this video. I'm lucky I caught it. I was sitting in the back, out of the where nothing was happening. No one was sitting around me, but you're going to see three women walking down the aisle. It's a very short clip and it's going to loop for you. The woman in the beige shirt is counting votes. And the two women trailing behind her, one of them is in a red shirt, one of them is in a blue shirt, and they are just watching her like a hawk, watching her count because they didn't trust it. So I'm going to show you this video. Let me bring this up here. So as you can see it, the woman in the beige shirt, she's counting, and she's got two women following her to make sure that she's counting right. And at one point, the woman in the blue actually was standing so close to the woman in beige, watching her mouth move as she was mouthing the count to herself. This is preposterous. But this is how they spent hours and hours on Saturday instead of talking about the upcoming election. This was much more important. But they had election observers. And then there was a whole kerfuffle because one of the election observers one of the counters got frustrated with the election observer and dropped an F-bomb and told her to get the F out of her face anyway, and breached decorum. And so everybody was clutching their pearls. But I had to, it was extremely hard for me to not laugh out loud, to just guffaw in the back of the room as to what I was seeing, because the vote was happening right in front of our faces, but nobody trusted it. So they had to have not one, but two election observers to make sure that count was right. Tristan Bills asks on YouTube, is this how they want to run our elections? I wouldn't put it past them. They all are for hand counting and paper ballots. Oh, and that's the other thing. So when they had these two resolutions, one of them to restore the vice chair, and we'll get into why, and the second one to oust the party chair, they usually do it just by a standing vote, but they decided to go to secret ballots because they were afraid of being intimidated or people would be able to vote their conscience freer. So, and they spent hours trying to get to that point. It was so ridiculous. A lot of people said these meetings sound like torture. I love them. I'm a civics dork. That's why I went. I don't think that you could have kept me away from that meeting. But, it was really hard. It was really hard because sometimes it's just ridiculous, and people are just fighting over the stupidest things. So anyway, that sets the scene. So why were they having these resolutions to reinstate? Why are they having these resolutions to reinstate the party vice chair and kick out the party chair? Well, to do that, you have to go all the way back to last year's election, the 2025 election. The Salt Lake County GOP they had a plan to endorse candidates in municipal elections, which are nonpartisan. But they were going to endorse candidates because you do have some people who are Republicans running for those positions. You have people who are Democrats. Other county parties do that. Utah County does it. I think a few others do it. But Salt Lake County was going to endorse candidates. And a very small group of people, someone in the chat asked if it was the Phil Lymanites. Absolutely, yes. A very small group of people led by Tracy Halverson, who actually lost the Salt Lake County Party chairmanship to Mike Carey in 2024. She claimed that the party endorsing these candidates was election interference. It's not election interference. She doesn't understand the part of the law that she is quoting here, but it's not election interference. But she claimed it was election interference. And what happened was She and 7 other people on who were members of the party, and they held like leadership positions. They were legislative district chairs or precinct chairs or whatever, or members of the state central committee or the county central committee. They sent a letter to city prosecutors in 3 cities. I think Draper, Bluffdale. I can't remember the other one. Draper, Bluffdale, maybe Sandy. Anyway, they sent letters to 3 of the city prosecutors, urging them to prosecute, to file charges and prosecute party leadership over this supposed election interference. Not only that, but they sent letters to the Department of Justice. They sent a letter to FBI Director Kash Patel. They sent a letter to then Attorney General Pam Bondi saying, we've got election interference happening here in Utah and you need to prosecute them. Well, needless to say, that didn't go over too well, especially the fact that they used their titles with the party when they signed these letters. That's what got them in trouble. They signed these letters and put their title within the Republican Party, the Salt Lake County Republican Party. They used their titles, and that's what got them in trouble. One of the people who was part of this was former state school board member Natalie Klein. She was one of them. So they used their titles within this county party when they signed these letters to the city prosecutors and to the Department of Justice and the Attorney General and the FBI Director. And that's what got them in trouble. So there was a whole investigation. There were charges brought up. And in February, there was this extraordinary meeting that lasted 12 hours. That controversy, yelling. I wasn't allowed to be in there. I'm not a member of the executive committee. It was a closed meeting. But in the end, what happened was the party chose to discipline 7 people, 7 members who signed those letters. Tracy Halverson was one of them. She caught some extra charges. But for the most part, the 6 people were stripped of their party titles, stripped of their positions within the party, and they were banned from attending Republican events until mid-2030 for urging prosecution, trying to turn law enforcement against leadership of the party. Halverson caught some extra charges because of her constant attacks on social media. And if you've followed her social media accounts, you know what I'm talking about. Just these constant attacks against party officials. And they got her for like breaching decorum. And she caught some extra charges. And so they lost their positions, banned from attending party events until 2030. So that's where this started. In May, at the Central Committee meeting, I was there. There was an attempt to reinstate these members, to overturn those charges, try to have the Central Committee overturn those charges. And they spent hours debating that. It was another wild meeting, and that failed by 1 vote. So what does this have to do with Sarah Montez? Well, Sarah Montez, as the party vice chair, she recused herself from that hearing in February where the 7 members were disciplined. She said, I'm recusing myself from this meeting. I'm not going to be a part of it. But then afterwards, she publicly spoke out against the punishments against the party members. And that angered the other leaders of the party. And then during the May meeting, all of the party leaders were on the stage. It was in a school auditorium, so they're on the stage, the dais. That's their position, unless they are recusing themselves. And Mike Carey, like on Saturday, he recused himself from running that part of the meeting because he didn't think it was proper. But for the most part, party leadership sits on the stage while everything's going on. Well, she came off of the dais, came down from the stage, and was in the crowd trying to whip votes for this resolution to restore these 7 members. And the resolution failed by 1 vote, but she was trying to whip votes for that, trying to do that, even though she was supposed to be on the stage with the rest of the leadership team. Well, a couple of days later, the rest of the leadership team, they used a bylaw in the Salt Lake County GOP's bylaw that says if in the opinion of the other officers, if in their opinion that one officer is unwilling or incapable of fulfilling their duties, and it literally says in the opinion, and they vote unanimously, they can remove that person from office. And that's what they did, citing the fact that Montez recused herself from the February meeting and then spoke out against it and then was trying to whip votes during the May meeting. And they said that, she was going against the rest of the leadership team, so she was unwilling or incapable of doing her duty. So they unanimously voted to oust her from the position. So when you get to Saturday, there's a resolution to reinstate her as the party vice chair. The problem is that's probably not allowed under the party rules. There's no mechanism under the party rules that allows the Central Committee to overturn this. Kirby Glad, who was the parliamentarian, explained that to them. He said the way that this bylaw is written, it sucks. But the problem is you can restore her today. You can reinstate her today, but they could meet tomorrow and just once again remove her from office, and then you're back to where you started. Well, the resolution to reinstate her passed. And so now it's kind of a middle area. My sense is they're not really going to challenge this. They're just going to let what happened and just move on from there because the election is looming. So the Central Committee voted to reinstate Sarah Montez, even though the party bylaws don't allow that. So that happened. Then we get to the resolution to remove Kerry from office as the party chair. Charges were abuse of power. Said that he intimidated people. Steve Aist, who wrote both of these resolutions or sponsored them, he said, let me pull it up here. His quote was, "Under the leadership of Mike Carey, the Salt Lake County GOP is imploding. Under Carey, debate has been stifled and dissent has been stamped out. Other members of the party are afraid they will be next." So that was the reason why they were voting this. Carey got a chance to speak on his behalf, and when he did, it was kind of eye-opening. He said that since these attacks on him have started, he's gotten death threats from people in the party. His car has been tampered with. He said his family is terrified. And, that was one of his defenses. He says, I'm getting attacked. And it's being driven by members of my own party. Well, in the end, they actually had two ballots. They had two votes. The first vote was whether or not to approve the resolution. And if they did approve the resolution, then there was a vote to remove. And so the resolution only needed a simple majority, but for it to actually take place, they needed to get a 2/3 majority. So they were collecting ballots at the same time. People were writing on one ballot. Remember, we were doing the paper ballots. One ballot, they were writing whether or not they wanted to vote in favor of the resolution, and the second ballot was whether or not they were going to remove Kerry from office. When they counted the votes, the resolution failed by 2 votes. It was 135 to 137. So it doesn't matter. The second vote to remove him from office was moot. And then it was 4:00 and the meeting was adjourned. What they didn't get to was the plan about the election. They didn't get to hear from the party treasurer. He was going to present the budget on Saturday. The things of the business of running the party. But you've got this small minority, a very vocal minority of people who just want to keep relitigating these issues over and over again. And it has really tied the executive committee's hands, the leadership committee's hands. And, I'm not advocating one way or the other. I'm just an observer. But as I was observing, I kept saying to myself, this is the reason why normal people don't get involved in politics, because they don't want to spend Saturday hanging out with what is essentially they're going to look at this and say, these are a bunch of weirdos. These are weirdos, and they don't want to spend their Saturday hanging out with them and fighting over this stuff. They might want to get involved because they want to help win elections. That was not discussed at all on Saturday. Unfortunately, that's pretty typical. So the next time that the Central Committee meets, well, they're scheduled to meet in November, but it's probably going to be after the elections are over. So when are they going to have a chance to look at this plan to win their plans for the 2026 election? I don't know when, but I do know this. I don't want to hear any complaining when they don't like the plan, or I don't want to hear any complaining that they were never briefed on this. You had your opportunity. You had 9 hours. You had 9 hours on Saturday. It was actually 7 hours. Sorry, 7 hours on Saturday. You had 7 hours, a Saturday afternoon. But instead, you spend your time doing this. One person said to me years ago that the easiest argument that they could ever make about anyone getting involved in politics is to take them to a Republican Central Committee meeting, because this is not an outlier. This sort of thing happens a lot. Mida 19 says they are volunteers, not professionals. The Democrats do dumb things too. Hilarious. Yeah, the Democrats do dumb things too. Democrats aren't in charge. They're not in charge, right? The Republicans, they've got a supermajority in the legislature. They're in charge. That's why it gets attention. And the problem is this is the kind of thing that happens when you don't have a robust opposition party. The opposition party is inside the Republican Party. Because Democrats, they're a super minority up on the Hill. They might take control of the Salt Lake County Council this year. That's one of the biggest things that Republicans are trying to defend this year. We just have a comment on YouTube from Gabe Gabriel, who says, do you think they wasted all that time in part because of the supermajority? I think the supermajority enables them. They're not worried about losing elections to Democrats. And that's when you get this sort of weird dysfunction. That's where you get this sort of extremely weird dysfunction. You look at political parties in other states, and a lot of them don't do this. But here in Utah, Republicans are so dominant that it allows these extreme voices to take control. That's why. This is the reason why they want to get rid of the signature path to the ballot. Before SB 54 went into effect, and candidates had to go through the convention system, and the delegates controlled access to the ballot, and they decided who the winners were. And that's why you got extreme candidates. SB 54 came about because in 2012, Bob Bennett, the Republican delegates were really mad about the whole TAMF thing, the TAMF payments. This is the rise of the Tea Party. And he didn't see the threat coming, and that's why he was ousted at the Republican convention. And then you had Tim Bridgewater, who actually won the convention vote, and Mike Lee advancing to the primary, and then Mike Lee won, and that's how Mike Lee got into office. Delegates are completely fine with that process. Then you have the signature path, and now people don't have to take a knee to the delegates to try to get on the ballot. If the signature path was not in place, Spencer Cox would not be the governor right now. It'd most likely be Phil Lyman. That's why they filed those insane lawsuits trying to throw him out of office. That's what they want. So, yeah, I mean, that's the system that they want to go back to. That's a system that they want to get back to, where the Republican delegates basically politically control the state. And I've said this before. I think one of the big reasons why Stuart Adams lost this year is because it was the first time he actually had to campaign for his job. Every other time that he was either elected to the legislature, and the 2 times he was first elected to the legislature, to the House and the Senate, were through special elections where the delegates decided. And then when he ran for re-election, he always won the nomination at convention where delegates decided. And then he's in a safe seat, so he didn't really have to campaign. This year, he had Stephanie Hollis get signatures and qualify for the ballot through signatures. His first ever primary. It was the first time he had to pitch himself as a candidate to a universe of voters that was much larger than Republican delegates. And you know what? It didn't work. They didn't like him. The not Stuart Adams vote was significantly larger than the yes Stuart Adams vote. He got 34%. So 2/3 of the voters in that district said no to Stuart Adams. They either picked Stephanie Hollis, she got 43%, I believe, and then the other candidate, Jared Hess, got the rest of that. But the not Stuart Adams vote was much more significant than the yes Stuart Adams vote. And this was the first time he had to do that. First time he had to go outside of the comfort of the delegate system. The delegates love Stuart Adams. Well, they did. He would always wrap up the convention, and he never really had a serious opponent in the past either. This is the first time that happened. And the people I talked to in that district said that his campaign was one of the worst they've ever seen. I'm not surprised. He's never had to do it before. Gabriel asks, clutching so tight to the insular wing of the party seems like a self-defeating strategy in the long term. In our culture right now, in our culture where information is available at your fingertips, where it's instant gratification, people do not want delegates, Republican delegates, making their decisions for them anymore. They don't want that. They want to make these decisions themselves. And the whole attitude, the whole thing about the delegates, it's really kind of arrogant if you think about it. We're the ones who vet the candidates. You should trust us to make the decision for you. People don't like that. People want to make their own decisions. That's why I think it would be really foolhardy to get rid of SB 54. I don't know. It's going to be difficult to do it. And I think the backlash would be extremely bad. They might be able to get through one election cycle where the delegates are back in charge, but I think all hell would break loose after that because people like it. I think that this proposed ballot initiative that they tried to get on the ballot to get rid of the independent redistricting commission, they were going to, I think that was probably going to lose had it gone on to the ballot because people, they like the idea of an independent redistricting commission. And after Stuart Adams lost, they backed off this idea that they were going to put a repeal of Prop 4 on the ballot. And, or put the ability to a constitutional amendment that will allow them to repeal Prop 4 on the ballot. And I think they saw what happened to Stuart Adams and they were like, maybe we don't need to do that right now. People are mad. Voters are mad all over the country. So this is probably not the best time. And to keep doing this whole, the delegates know best. They're the ones who are the most informed. I don't know how many, I used to talk to, when I would talk to Republicans who were running under the delegate system, they said that they had so many conversations about conspiracy theories, about the United Nations wanting to take over Utah. This was before the signature path. They would tell me about, and it was a good job to be a delegate because you got free lunches all the time. When Orrin Hatch ran for re-election in 2014, and Dan Lillianquist tried to run the same playbook that Mike Lee and Tim Bridgewater did when they ousted Bob Bennett. They were going to try to get him at convention. It didn't work, and Orrin Hatch recognized the threat. His team spent $5 million getting his delegates elected and then wooing those delegates through meals, whatever. It used to be a really good gig to be a state delegate because you would get free lunches all the time. You get cottage meetings with the candidates. Now, delegates are not that as important, and they don't like it. They don't like the fact that they're not the final say when it comes to the nominations. Captain Bubba on TikTok says, when I ran for city council 3 years ago and had those same conspiracy theory conversations, the most insane people are also the most politically active. Yeah, they are the ones. They're the ones who go to caucus meetings. They live for that stuff. A couple of years ago, one of the candidates for, I think, state chair, I think it was before when Rob Axe, anyway, there was a candidate for state chair, and their idea for the Republican Party was to move the caucuses from a Tuesday night to Saturday, which would give more people the opportunity to participate, because it's really hard to go on a Tuesday night. If you're young, you got to get childcare. It's really hard. He wanted to do something like they do in Nevada, where they hold the caucus meetings on the weekend, making it a lot easier for people to attend. That got shot down immediately. Oh, the delegates didn't like that. And when, at the caucus meetings in 2024, I think the estimate was only 9% of all of the Republican voters in the state went to those. Just 9%. And I know it was probably far less this year when they elected new delegates, because you get lesser turnout on off-year elections. So yeah, you get the people who are the most committed also happen to be the most extreme, and that leads to extreme candidates and extreme nominees. So anyway, let's talk about vote by mail. As you know, on Monday, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a ruling in Trump v. California. And a whole bunch of states sued to block this executive order from the Trump administration. One, it would have the Department of Homeland Security come up with a list of people that they believe are not eligible voters, so people who they believe are non-citizen voters, and then that list would go to the United States Postal Service, and the Postal Service would not be allowed to deliver ballots to anyone who was on that list and anyone who was not on the list of voters from states. And that's the kind of thing that would impact Utah, because we are primarily a vote-by-mail state. I think that Salt Lake Tribune had an analysis that was like 96% of all the ballots, or maybe it was 90%, but about 90% or more of all the ballots from the primary election were vote-by-mail. Utahns like vote-by-mail. That's where all the ballots were. In a couple of counties, every single ballot was done by mail or at a drop box. But they're trying to get rid of that. And that's one of the reasons why the Justice Department is pushing to get the unredacted voter rolls. So these states sued to try to block it. The Supreme Court went ahead and came up with a ruling that gives the federal government some administration over elections. The Constitution doesn't say that they can do that. But, if you read the opinion, you can just see the pretzels that the Supreme Court twist themselves into to allow this. So that's the first thing. But the part about mail-in voting, the part where restricting the mail-in voting, and USPS, the Postal Service, said they're going to try to move forward with this. They're going to try to implement it. One of the reasons why the Supreme Court overturned this lower court injunction is because they actually haven't come up with rules for what to do in the election. And so the lawsuit was premature. There were no rules. There's nothing to actually challenge. And so there's no reason to have this happening. There's no reason to move forward on this right now because it wasn't ripe. That's one of the reasons why they overturned it. Well, now this allows the Trump administration, Department of Homeland Security, USPS, to come up with rules on how they're going to implement this executive order. And remember, executive orders do not carry the force of law. And the U.S. Constitution does not give the executive branch any administration over elections. Administration of elections is to the states. But Trump really wants to stamp out mail-in voting. And aside, I don't know if you saw this article in NBC News, but they got a hold of a video of a meeting between Homeland Security officials and Nevada election officials. They did a public records request. And so there was a meeting, it was a Zoom meeting involving people from the Department of Homeland Security, Justice Department, I think, as well, and Nevada election officials, in which the Trump administration had said there are at least 15,000 people on Nevada's voting rolls who are ineligible, who are non-citizens, who should not be there. So these Nevada election officials were meeting with Trump administration officials and asked them. They said, okay, you said there's 15,000 people. Can you show us that? And the Trump administration had to admit that it's not 15,000. They said that it's about 185 people that they think need more investigation. They said that they've identified 185 people, not 15,000, 185. And so the Nevada election official said, can you tell us who they are? Because we'll take them off the rolls right now. Can you tell us who these people are? And the Trump administration said, no, we're not done with our investigation yet. We're not going to tell you yet. That's all you need to know about these claims of election interference and non-citizens voting. It doesn't happen. It's not happening. It is a completely made up panic so that Trump can mess with the election. So anyway, from that aside, after this decision from the Supreme Court came down, Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson came out and said, this doesn't impact Utah yet because there's another case that has a nationwide injunction that's against the Postal Service not delivering ballots to people. Now, we're expecting to get a decision on that tomorrow. And then at that point, then we'll probably have some guidance. And if that went the way that this one went, I suspect the Supreme Court is going to try to find a way to lift that injunction. And then we might have some issues with vote by mail. I don't think Utah is going to be super impacted by that because we're a Republican state. The states that really are going to be impacted or targeted are Democratic states or states where the Republican majority in Congress could be impacted, could be threatened. That's what this is all about because Republicans behind closed doors, they know that the electorate is mad. And if it's a big turnout, things go the way that everyone expects, they're probably going to lose the House of Representatives and maybe lose control of the Senate. And if that happens, the Trump agenda just grinds to a halt. It's done. That is effectively the end of Donald Trump's presidency because there are going to be investigations for years. They're going to haul him, his family members, administration members in for hearings. There's going to be investigations because Democrats will have subpoena power. There could even be impeachment proceedings. So that they're very worried about that. And when you look at affordability, when you look at the cost of living, when you look at the housing crisis, the cost of gas, everything that's happening, inflation going up, Trump's tariffs, they're bringing in beef from Argentina that reportedly was rejected by China because it had some illegal chemicals in it. And China said, we don't want it. But from what the reporting is that this beef that they're bringing in from Argentina was rejected by China. But it's fine for us because our beef prices are high. And now you got the ranchers who are really mad about this, about bringing in this beef, because it's going to really hurt their bottom lines. And so people are really angry. This is shaping up to be a change election. And in change elections, people lose their seats. The president usually loses seats in a midterm election anyway. But with how historically unpopular Donald Trump is and how little the Republicans in Congress have done, this could be really, really bad for them. But, they did have the redistricting in the middle of the year, middle of the cycle in order to ostensibly give them in theory, give them more seats. So who knows what's going to happen? I'm not convinced it's going to go one way or the other. The experts seem to think that Democrats have a really good chance of getting back the House of Representatives and maybe the Senate. G. Elliott Morris, who I had on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, he has a great website, 50+1, that is an election forecasting website, and they are saying that the Democrats have about a 75 or 85% chance of winning the control of the House, and they put their about 55% chance of winning control of the Senate. Bottom line is we're going to know more tomorrow. Last thing I want to talk about tonight. Enes Freedom Kanter, washed up NBA player. I'm sure you've seen this where he and another person who's so forgettable, I can't remember his name, anyway, Roy something. They are declaring for the WNBA draft. They're now all of a sudden identifying as a woman, and they're declaring for the WNBA draft. And on Sunday, Enes Kanter was sitting courtside at a game, Chicago Sky, and he got into an altercation with one of the players from the Chicago Sky. He was wearing a shirt that said woman, noun, female, human, or something like that. You know, it's this whole women in protect women's sports. So the guy who was trying to protect women's sports makes a whole scene at a women's sporting event, makes it all about him, gets into a yelling match with a member of the Chicago Sky, and he's escorted out of the building because he's a clown. I mean, this is just so dumb. You know, you hear people talking about the specter of men in women's locker rooms. Well, you know, just declaring that you're a woman so you can go into the NBA draft is exactly the kind of behavior that you are purporting to be against and protect these women from. You are doing the very thing that you have said is a threat to women. So anyway, Kanter was thrown out of the game. Today was announced that he has been banned from going to any of the Chicago Sky games, and that's good. He should be banned from all WNBA games for these stunts. He stepped onto the court. I don't know how he got those seats right near the floor. Great seats, but he stepped onto the court to have this whole altercation, make the whole thing about him. He's a clown. He's a big loser. But, of course, Senator Mike Lee weighed in and supported him. He writes, "Wearing this shirt isn't harassing anyone." Someone else on Twitter called Kanter a loser. Lee responded, "Maybe he just wants to protect women." That's how I know that Senator Mike Lee did not watch this game. He doesn't watch women's sports. None of these guys do. None of these guys watch women's sports. But they want to ruin it. They want to ruin it, and they want to make it all about them because they think it is so funny. You know, if Enes Kanter wants to declare for the WNBA draft, he should do what transgender athletes, when they are involved in like the Olympics or in other sports, have to do. And that is a year and a half of hormone therapy, hormone blockers. They have to do that. And if they don't go crazy because of that, then yeah, maybe they can play. Enes Kanter, at the end of his career, he couldn't guard anybody. Yeah, he's bigger and stronger than anyone in the WNBA. He'd probably score 30, 40 points a game, but he'd give up 70 because he can't move. But it's all just a stupid stunt, and it just takes away from this WNBA season, which has been fantastic. This is the best WNBA season ever. You have got record-setting performances. You've got a wide-open MVP race. But it's being consumed by this culture war stuff. And now you've got people on social media who have convinced themselves, the dumbest people on social media convincing themselves, that the only reason the WNBA is pushing back against this is because there are already transgender athletes in the WNBA. No, there's not. There are not, and there never has been. And there's no transgender athlete in the lower levels good enough who might be in the WNBA. This is a completely made up problem. This is a completely imaginary thing. But they're very worried about this. They're actually not very worried about this, but they think it's funny, and that's why they're doing it. But Enes Kanter got kicked out of the game. He wasn't kicked out of the game because he was wearing a t-shirt. He was kicked out of the game because he was yelling at this player for the Chicago Sky, the smallest player on the court, by the way, yelling at her, and she just had enough, and she finally went after him. Finally yelled back, and he stepped onto the court, which is a no-no. That is a violation of WNBA rules, and he got kicked out, and now he's banned from ever going to a Chicago Sky game again. And like I said, he should be banned from ever going to the WNBA. But this is such a dumb controversy. If you want to hear a really great breakdown of it, The podcast Pablo Torre Finds Out, it's by The Athletic. The New York Times actually won a Pulitzer this year. They did a fantastic series about it. They did a breakdown of Riley Gaines, where she came from, how her beliefs sort of formed, and the controversy surrounding that. And then they were talking about these men who think that they're just all of a sudden declaring themselves women, and now they can play in the WNBA, or identifying as a woman, which is not how any of this works. But this is just an attempt to bully this league that's having the best year ever. They're having a tremendous season. And it's just so sad that you've got clowns like Enes Kanter, who he's just decided that he wants to plug into the endless money anti-trans grift game. Because if you do that, you start attacking, if you are a high-profile anti-transgender position, just unlocks a ton of money on the right. There's a lot of money behind this. And that's what he's decided to do, because he's been completely irrelevant until then. So that's what he's doing. He's a clown. He's a loser. And, of course, Senator Mike Lee is defending him. I expect to get some sort of fundraising email from Senator Mike Lee about this. And what he'll be doing is he'll say, I'm going to raise money for Enes Kanter, but he's going to keep most of it. It's like the thing, like last week, he had a fundraiser where Democratic Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania was voicing some criticisms of the Democratic Party, and Senator Mike Lee was saying to him on social media, you should come over and join the Republican Party. I'm begging you. And then he sent out a fundraising email saying, hey, donate to me to show the kind of support that John Fetterman would get if he became a Republican. That's a stupid argument, but that's just the contempt that Mike Lee has for his voters. That's it. This whole thing, it's just contempt for their voters. And it just angers me, because they don't watch women's sports. They're not fans of women's sports. They don't care about women's sports. They're not trying to protect women. Because what they're doing, what Enes Kanter is doing, is exactly the imaginary situation that they are so worked up about. A man going into women's locker rooms. A man going into women's bathrooms. He's going to be doing the thing that they're purportedly trying to protect women against. And it's just stupid. And it really makes me sad. Bocephus says, why are politicians so narcissistic and selfish? It starts at the city council and gets worse. Well, if you want to run for office, there's got to be something wrong with you. Not in every case, but in a lot of cases, there's already something wrong with to subject yourself to that kind of thing. And if you're fans of Dune, I don't know if you've read any of the Dune books. Maybe you watched the movies, but you've read the Dune books. There is a theme running through that politics and power does not automatically attract corruptible people, but it makes the people who are already leaning that way easier to corrupt. And so, you get a lot of people who think that there are a lot, and this is not I'm over generalizing here. There are a lot of people get into politics because they want to help people. I think it's Mark Twain who said people get the legislators that they did deserve. And I think that that's true. Anyway, we've been talking for more than an hour and a half. I think that's going to do it for me tonight. Let me ask you a couple of favors. Whatever app you're watching this on, give me a like, a follow, subscribe on YouTube. Just drop that. It really doesn't cost you anything, but it helps more people see these. It helps more people see this content. So like, follow, share. That's the first favor. The second thing is go to my website, utahpolitics.news, sign up for my newsletter. That's free. And then you'll get a notification every time that I write a new story. That's absolutely free. That doesn't cost you anything. But if you feel like you want to support what I do, I'm an independent journalist. I don't have corporate backers. I don't have billionaire backers. I rely on listeners, readers, viewers. That's who supports all this work. And we're celebrating our second birthday. We've been doing this for 2 years now. And I'm so thankful that it has survived and it's growing. Marilee on TikTok says, do you live in Utah? Yes, I live in Utah. I've lived in Utah for, my daughter's 27, almost 28, 29 years now. So yes, I live here. But subscribe to my newsletter. It's at utahpolitics.news. And if you want to support what I do, I lost my train of thought there. If you support what I want to do, if you want to support what I'm doing, you can leave some money in the tip jar, or you can become a paying subscriber. And it's our second birthday. And because of that, I'm offering 20% off a subscription. There's a banner on the homepage. You'll see it. It's a long bar on the homepage that says it's our second birthday, get 20% off. You click on that, you will get a discount of 20%. A year subscription, instead of being $55, is $44. That's through the end of August. And that's what makes this possible. That's what makes these live streams possible. I'm able to do these live streams, to do the research, to do the setup, to do the research on my articles, to do the writing, all of that because of people who subscribe or leave a tip. And I'm so thankful that people do that, but we could always use more of you. So you can go to the website, utahpolitics.news. Love to have you come on board. Even if you're just even just sign up for my newsletter for free. Love to have you on board there. So head on over to there and do that. Hope you all have a great rest of the week. I'm pretty excited about this weekend. I'm going to go see Coyote versus Acme. I hear that movie is hilarious. I grew up on those Looney Tunes cartoons. So this is like catnip to me. I'm going to go see that. I'm pretty excited about that. Hope you have some great plans too. Kids are back in school. Hope they're adjusting well. My kids are grown and gone. I don't have to deal with that anymore. But as I said, we'll be back next week with another episode. And if anything happens, I'll be sure to have another live stream, record a video, write a story, whatever happens. So be on the lookout for that. Until then, everybody have a great evening. Have a great rest of the week. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and we will see you again soon. Bye.